Daniel Sports Central, we go for our 2022 college football predictions for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, team that went 11-2 overall in the 2021 season. Overall, great season for Notre Dame. But how this team be in 2022? That's what we'll be going over here today. We'll be analyzing this team and predicting their schedule game by game in this video, starting out with your team trends. Notre Dame 11-2 last season, 5-1 in their first 6 games, 6-1 in their last 7. 11-2, that is an outstanding record. So, it was a great season for Notre Dame. And, of course, there are a couple of question marks for this team heading into 2021, especially the quarterback situation was a big concern, but they had Jack Cohn going in, who was a pretty experienced quarterback from Wisconsin. So there wasn't, once he announced that he was transferring to Notre Dame, of course, we knew he was a good quarterback, but it was uncertain as to whether or not he could lead Notre Dame to a high level nationally. But overall, I'd say he did pretty well for this team. 11-2 is obviously an outstanding record. Beat Purdue on September 18th, 27-13. Turns out Purdue was a good team last season. They beat Wisconsin 41-13. That was an insane matchup there. You got Wisconsin going up against their former starting quarterback, Jack Cohn. That had some huge storylines going into that matchup, and Notre Dame just absolutely blew out Wisconsin there. They were ranked 18th in the nation at the time. Lost to Cincinnati. That was the most crucial loss of the season. That one kind of came back to haunt them a bit, because in the end, that's why Cincinnati got to the college football playoff, was because they beat Notre Dame in that matchup. They would have lost in that matchup, Cincinnati would not have been in the college football playoff, and instead it would have more than likely been Notre Dame, or it would have been Notre Dame, because that was their only loss in the regular season. So that loss came back to haunt them, but Cincinnati was just their season, so got to give credit to them. Beat USC 31-16. That was a huge win, and also beat North Carolina 44-34. That was a solid win there. Lost to Oklahoma State though in their bowl game 35-37. That game was close. If I remember right, Notre Dame had a large lead there for a while, but Oklahoma State came back and got the win. Oklahoma State was ranked number 9, and the Cowboys certainly had a good season as well. So kind of a disappointing end there, losing to the Cowboys there by 2, but once again, 11-2 is a great record, and for Notre Dame, it was a good season. But of course, going into next season, there are multiple changes. Jack Cohn is gone. Of course, it was just a one-season affair for Jack Cohn, and now it looks like Tyler Buchner is the most likely quarterback to take over for next season. You got Drew Pine also in the background, but it looks like Tyler Buchner is the favorite right now to win that starting position. So we'll see how he does. He's a younger quarterback still, but I do think he's got some potential. Of course, you got Kyron Williams also gone. Last season, he was major impact player, 1,300 yards and 17 touchdowns. So you're obviously losing him, and that's going to be a tough loss. But you got Tyree coming back, so that's good news going into next season. If you look at him, last year he put up 480 yards and 3 touchdowns, so he didn't have anywhere near as big of an impact as Kyron Williams did, but he's still, watch out for him to have a big impact on this team going to next season. Kevin Austin, you lose him, your top receiver, but you return your tight end, your star tight end there, and Michael Mayer. He was outstanding last season. Michael Mayer put up 840 yards and 7 touchdowns as a tight end. He is listed as a tight end, and those are some incredible stats for someone in that position. So keep an eye on him. Avery Davis also coming back, and same with Braden Lenzy. So if you look at Davis and Lenzy, Davis put up 400 yards last season. Lenzy also put up just over 400 yards of total offense. So receiving corps got some good depth going to next season. Not too concerned about the backfield with Tyree coming back. And the quarterback situation, I think, looks decent. Jack Cohn last year wasn't a bad season. If you look at his stats, 3,100 yards, 25 touchdowns, 7 picks, 65% completion rate. Those stats were not terrible. But when Tyler Buchner played, he did pass for 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, 3 picks. So really didn't look too good when he did play, but he only threw 35 passes. Drew Pine threw 30 passes, and overall had better stats, you could say, in those passes against Tyler Buchner. But once again, we haven't seen either of the quarterbacks playing very much. So we'll see what happens there. The quarterback situation, though, is certainly a question mark going into next season. And of course, you lose one on the offensive line. You also lose 2 defensive linemen, 2 linebackers, and you lose 1 in the secondary. So defensively, you lose 5 starters, but I'm not too concerned. The depth is pretty good in that area. And of course, you got the the coaching situation as well. Can't forget about that. Brian Kelly, of course, taking off. He's off to LSU. So he left Notre Dame in the dust, but instead he got Marcus Freeman, who I feel like is a coach who's going to do great with Notre Dame. I feel like he's definitely the man for the job, and Marcus Freeman, looking forward to seeing what he does with the Fighting Irish going into next season and into the future as well. Brings up the question, though, chances of a return to the college football playoff in 2022. I mean, of course, this is a younger team going into next season, but I think Notre Dame is bound for another college football playoff run here within the next 3 seasons. I mean, I don't know if 2022 is going to be the year for them to make it to the college football playoff, just because there's a few question marks and it's a bit of a younger team. But of course, I mean, the pieces are there. I mean, you got the talent to make it back. But of course, it still is a bit uncertain considering some of the inexperience that there is on this team. Transfer portal and recruiting going into next season. You got Brandon Joseph coming in from Northwestern, safety, but you're losing multiple players. You're losing a safety who's in the transfer portal. Looks like you also lose a tight end there. You lose defensive back JoJo Johnson, defensive tackle Quinn Carroll, quarterback Brendan Clark. He really didn't have too big of an impact though. Bramblett, a punter, is off to LSU, and you do bring in Chris Smith, defensive lineman from Harvard, who actually could have a decent impact, so keep an eye on him. Recruiting-wise, 7th in the nation, which is definitely solid. They got 1 5-star coming in, 17 4-stars as well, so recruiting is excellent going into next season. So, but of course, the transfer portal, you're losing a few players, but no one too terribly notable. I mean, you got, a couple of changes there, but, certainly I'm not too concerned about the situation with the transfer portal for this team. Looking at your schedule now going into next season, you got Ohio State, major matchup there in week 1 on the road. That's probably your most important game of the regular season there, especially if you want to make it to the college football playoff. That would be a huge resume builder there if you can beat the Buckeyes on the road, and that's not going to be an easy task. Ohio State is, I'd say, one of my top 3 teams that I'm favoriting to win the national title next season. We got Alabama and Ohio State for sure, potentially Georgia in the background, maybe even Oklahoma State or Utah. Those are my top 5 as of this summer, but I got Ohio State. That's going to be a tough team. A very talented team next season, so that's a challenge. You got Marshall then at home. You got Cal at home after that. North Carolina on the road. BYU in a neutral location. BYU could be good next season. Stanford at home. UNLV at home. Then you got Syracuse on the road. Clemson at home. Navy in a neutral location as well. Boston College at home, and then USC on the road to finish out the season. So your 2 toughest games, your 2 most important games, are likely your first and last games of the season. USC and Ohio State, both huge games. BYU, don't sleep on that one. That's a huge one there. BYU could be good. Clemson, of course, should be a contender as well. But I'm not as high on Clemson as many analysts are. Clemson, I don't know if I trust Uiagalelei to lead them to the college football playoff. I think he's a little too inconsistent. But if he improves, Clemson is definitely able to. But looking at September, Ohio State, I'm going to take Ohio State in that game. Going on the road there in week 1. Of course, Notre Dame's got a few big changes. If you win that game against the Buckeyes in Columbus, that is a massive win. That is a big deal if you win that week 1 matchup, but I've got Ohio State pulling that one out in the end. Then you got Marshall and Cal to follow that. Both easy wins, I'd say. Then you got North Carolina on the road. Tar Heels, their year was going to be 2021. They disappointed last season. It looks like they're going into a rebuilding phase into 2022, so I don't really expect North Carolina to be too good, but I do think that's a closer one with it being on the road and a tougher place to play on occasion. So they're 3-1 heading into October. You got BYU, huge matchup after your bye week. I'm going to pick Notre Dame to win that matchup against BYU. I do think the Cougars, though, won't be. That's going to be a tough team. Stanford, UNLV, Syracuse, pretty comfortable picking Notre Dame in all those games. So, your schedule isn't terribly difficult through your first 2 months of action there. Especially your October. BYU is your biggest deal in October, and otherwise, you should easily win Stanford, UNLV, and Syracuse. But of course, your September. North Carolina, I don't know about them, but Ohio State obviously is going to be a tough game. But you're 7-1 heading into November. I think 7-1 is incredibly reasonable for this team to start off the season. And of course, November's a crucial month, especially if you want to make it or have any chance of making the college football playoff. Got to win these last 4 games. You beat Clemson. That's going to be a huge one there. And you beat Navy and Boston College pretty easily. But USC, now the Trojans, of course, are a team that is thought of to be a bit overrated going into next season. And of course, there's an argument there. I mean, Lincoln Riley, I mean, he's going over a course, an excellent head coach from Oklahoma. Caleb Williams following him there. And, I mean, you also can't forget about Travis Dye. He transferred into USC from Oregon, and Travis Dye was an excellent running back, to say the least, for Oregon last season. So you can't forget about him. But I feel like USC is a team that I can safely say is going to be in the 8 to 10, maybe 11 win range. I do think that they're going to be a contender, and they're going to be a tough team. I don't know if they win the Pac-12, but USC is going to be a good team. I feel like Notre Dame slips up there and does take a close loss to the Trojans. We finish out the season 10-2, which is, I mean, that would be, I'd say, an excellent situation if you can finish out the season 10-2. And considering some of the inexperience that's on this team for next season, I mean, that sets you up great. If you can get up to 10 wins, 2023, I mean, 2023 is a season that I really think if this team can keep their players from transferring out and they can return most of their talent from next season, 2023 could very well be the Fighting Irish's year. But I think Notre Dame 10-2 next season is incredibly reasonable, and here's what I got for them. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below on Notre Dame, and I appreciate you guys watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.